Hailie Deegan's future in NASCAR is very uncertain. Cole Custer will likely join the Haas factory team in 2025, and Trackhouse Racing has sold off part of their team to an investor. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got some NASCAR and other motorsports stories Custer today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just show them straight nose really quickly. We're first going to take a look at a couple paint schemes that have been revealed over the course of the last couple of days. Let's go ahead and just show them straight into them. The first paint scheme we're taking a look at is BJ McLeod's 2024 Kvapil Enterprises scheme that we'll see this weekend in the Brickyard 400. Scheme looks okay in my opinion. Never been a big fan of the Kvapil Enterprises schemes. This one's okay though. Glad to see BJ McLeod be driving this car though this weekend. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is John Hunter Nemechek's 2024 Pie Barker scheme that we'll see this weekend at Indianapolis and a couple other races throughout 2024. Scheme's okay in my opinion. Legacy's had some okay ones. This one's okay. Hopefully John Hunter Nemechek can have a decent run this weekend with this paint scheme. And the final paint scheme we're taking a look at is Kyle Busch's 2024 Cheddar's Patriotic scheme that we're going to see this weekend at the Brickyard 400. This looks excellent, very similar to the other Cheddar's Patriotic schemes we've seen in the Coke 600 in the past and also during 4th of July weekend. I think this looks amazing, looks absolutely incredible, and I'm definitely for sure looking forward to see on the racetrack this week in Indianapolis. I think it looks absolutely amazing. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about True Value. As it was announced yesterday that True Value will officially sponsor IRCK in a return this weekend at Lime Rock Park. Many legendary drivers like Greg Biffle, Bobby Labonte, I believe Mark Martin as well, and a couple other big names like Ken Schrader are also going to be in this event. It's really cool to see though that True Value is going to be sponsoring the IRCK series. True Value was the original sponsor of the series back in the day. It's really excellent, very exciting, and glad to see that True Value will officially be sponsoring IRCK in the return at Lime Rock Park. And now we're going ahead jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Larson. As it was announced a couple days ago that Kyle Larson will be running the Hendrick 1100 scheme once again at the Brickyard 400. Kyle Larson was supposed to drive this car during the Coke 600, but remember he did technically miss the race because of the fact that he was running the Indy 500. There was a big rainstorm that came through, and they didn't even know if they're going to get the race in until Monday, but they got the race in on Sunday. And Kyle Larson never got a chance and opportunity to drive the car at the Coke 600 because NASCAR decided to call it despite the fact they had track drivers on the track. I'm glad to see that this car is back. I think Kyle Larson will have a good chance and opportunity to run really well. I think he's going to be a threat for the win in the Brickyard 400, and his scheme looks very excellent in my opinion. And now we're going ahead jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Raising Cane's. As there was a report by Adam Stern on late Tuesday evening that Raising Cane's has opened up a new location in Daytona Beach. And it's going to be inspired by NASCAR as it will pay homage to NASCAR. Raising Cane's, of course, had a big association with Tony Breininger a couple times we've seen in the last year or so. And they're going to be working with NASCAR once again in a pretty big way down there. I love Raising Cane's. Fantastic food, a really great product, and I think it's pretty cool and excellent to see that Raising Cane's will have an inspired shop, obviously with Daytona being right there, being one of the higher up headquarters for NASCAR. It makes a lot of sense to have a shop in that specific area. And now we're going ahead jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Jack Roush. As it was reported by IRCK Racing that Jack Roush has now had 4,000 starts in the NASCAR Cup Series as an owner. With Brad Keselowski and Chris Buescher both starting, they will complete the trifecta of getting Jack Roush his 4,000th start. Jack Roush has been in the sport for a very, very long time, going all the way back to 1988, when their first start, of course, was the 1988 Daytona 500. They've had a lot of success. The Roush Fenway Group for IRCK Groups had a lot of success, and they've continued to grow as an organization over the course of the last few years, especially Brad Keselowski coming in and becoming a part owner. This is really great to see nonetheless, and very proud to see that Jack Roush accomplished this. Congratulations to Jack Roush on now officially having 4,000 starts in the Cup Series as an owner of the sport. And now we're going ahead jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Rick Hendrick. As it was announced yesterday that Rick Hendrick will be driving the pace car for this year's Brickyard 400. Obviously, it being the 30-year anniversary of the Brickyard 400, which Jeff Gordon went on to win in that number 24 legendary Rainbow Warrior scheme, it makes a ton of sense. Rick Hendrick, obviously, one of the legends, one of the greatest owners ever, and I think it's amazing to see that he's going to get the chance and opportunity. Obviously, with it also being the 40-year anniversary for Hendrick Motorsports, it makes a ton of sense as well. So this is amazing to see for sure, and pretty awesome that Rick Hendrick will be able to drive the pace car for this year's Brickyard 400. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Indianapolis IRP purses. Every time we have a NASCAR Cup, Xfinity Series, and truck race, Bob Pockers puts out the purse money. And according to Bob, for the Cup race is $9,596,601. For the Xfinity race is $1,873,623. And for the truck race at IRP, it's going to be $672,492. The Truck Series, once again, no shocker and surprise, is down on purse money. But for the Brickyard 400 this year, especially all the charter allocations of money coming in, there's a lot more money going to be used this year for the Brickyard 400, which I think is excellent and great. I think the purse money's decent for sure, and nonetheless, I think it's solid and good to see the purse money's up for the Brickyard 400. I do wish that the Truck Series, though, got a little bit more purse money. Hopefully, with the new TV deal coming in, we can see more money coming in for the Truck Series. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Richard Petty. As it was announced yesterday that Richard Petty will officially be the Grand Marshal for the Truck Series race at Richmond for the Clean Harbors 250. Richard Petty, of course, is a big association with the Clean Harbors group. I think they've been working with Richard for many, many years. And obviously with Dad Moffitt going to be driving the 46 truck, not for Team Faction 46, but obviously driving it for Young's Motorsports for the remainder of the year, it does make a ton and a lot of sense. And I think it's good that he's going to be able to give the command. One of the greatest ever. Obviously, it's been the 75th year of the Petty family being in the sport. I think it's a fantastic and great decision. And really awesome and glad to see that Richard Petty will be the Grand Marshal for the Truck Series race at Richmond when we do return in a couple weeks. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Roblox. As it was officially confirmed by NASCAR themselves that Roblox has a new NASCAR game. It's going to be called NASCAR Tycoon. We have been seeing that NASCAR has been rumored to be having an association with Fortnite recently, and now they've got a game in Roblox. Roblox is one of the biggest games online for a very, very long time. I think it's really cool that they're going to be doing this. They're going to be able to build up your own Cup Series team and build up your own team in the sport, which again, I find to be very fascinating and really awesome to see. So nonetheless, I think it's a fantastic and great change for sure, and really glad to see that Roblox will be working with NASCAR going into the future. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about David Starr. As it was officially confirmed earlier this evening that David Starr will drive the 14 for SS Greenlight Racing this weekend at Indianapolis. David Starr has made quite a few starts for SS Greenlight Racing over the course of the last couple of years, and I do believe he's made about 5 or 6 Xfinity Series starts so far in 2024. The good news for David Starr is no one's going to be going home with JD Motorsports. It could be a late entry, but we're not sure if they're officially showing up the track. We won't know until tomorrow for practice. It's good to see David Starr back in the field. I do expect he's going to finish near the back of the pack because they haven't qualified that great, but I do think David Starr will at least have an okay performance. I think he might have a chance of completing all the laps, but I don't expect him to set the world on fire. But I'm happy to see that he will once again be racing with SS Greenlight Racing this weekend at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Gary Johnson. As it was reported by Joseph Strigley of TobyChristie.com that Gary Johnson will be spotting for Jimmy Johnson at this year's Brickyard 400. Gary Johnson, for those who do not know, is Jimmy Johnson's father. And usually when you go to Indianapolis for the Brickyard 400, you tend to bring an extra spotter with you. So this makes a ton of sense. Gary helped Jimmy Johnson work his way up through the ranks in the motorsports world, and I certainly think Gary Johnson is, with how much knowledge he has of Jimmy Johnson, I think he's going to do a great job. And Earl Barban is also going to be spotting for Jimmy Johnson at the Brickyard as well. I think Jimmy's actually got a good chance and opportunity to do really well this weekend in Indianapolis. Hopefully they can prove me wrong from my picks earlier in the week. I do think Jimmy could have a decent performance, but I'm happy to see that Gary Johnson will be able to spot for Jimmy Johnson in this year's Brickyard 400. Really exciting and awesome stuff. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Happy Harvick podcast. As it was reported by Caitlin Vincey of Fox Sports that the Happy Harvick podcast will officially be joining Fox Sports 1 going forward during the weekdays, I believe on Tuesdays and Thursdays. This is really amazing news to hear, and what this tells me is that this will likely be the replacement for Race Hub. Remember, Race Hub shut down about a month and a half ago, and there has not been an episode of Race Hub since, and we've been kind of wondering what is going to be that show that's going to be taking over for NASCAR. Obviously, the Happy Harvick podcast or Happy Hour podcast has been solidly very, very successful. It's had some good things. We're going to be talking about a clip from that here in the later portion of this episode around Hailie Deegan. But I'm very happy to see that the Happy Hour podcast will be on Fox Sports 1 going forward. I think it's really solid and excellent stuff, and it's really good to see that it will be on FS1 going into the future. Really solid and excellent stuff. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Josh Bilicki. As it was announced yesterday that Josh Bilicki will be driving the 92 for DGM Racing this week in Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Josh Bilicki's made quite a few starts so far in 2024. He did make one start earlier this year at Portland in the number 19 car for Joe Gibbs Racing, and is expected to make a few more starts with Joe Gibbs Racing later this year. And he's also made a lot of starts with a team he's driven for many times, and that, of course, is DGM Racing. I don't think Josh is going to be a contender, unfortunately. I just think of how competitive the field is going to be, I don't expect him to set the world on fire. But that being said, I think this is a fantastic, great move overall, and I certainly do think that he is going to do a very solid and great job this week, and hopefully. So maybe prove me wrong, do great, but I'm glad to see that he'll be back behind the wheel this weekend at Indianapolis. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about dampers. As it was part of a Boise Tatarevic, is a big association with NASCAR and also competes in the IMSA series with the number 15 and 14 Lexus teams in IMSA and GT. He put out a very interesting announcement. He basically says that NASCAR will now allow teams to start installing a lifter system on the rear dampers of the cars. That means that NASCAR will be able to have a much easier way to pick up the cars when they do have multiple flat tires. With these cars not having inner liners, NASCAR will now have a much easier way to pick up the cars going forward, and they won't be waiting multiple laps and being put in a much more difficult position. This is a fantastic change, in my honest opinion, for NASCAR to do. We've been seeing a lot of drivers complain about this, where they can't hook these cars up and they go multiple laps down. And sometimes NASCAR will just tell the drivers that you need to get out of the car, and you have these drivers that get frustrated and they refuse to get out of the car because they feel like if NASCAR took them back to their pit stalls, they would have a much easier way to fix the problem. I think this certainly is an amazing change overall when it comes to fixing this issue. I think there's still some certain issues that this next-gen car has, but I certainly do believe that this is a fantastic and great step in the right direction. So I'm very happy about this. This change is coming, and it will be coming next month once NASCAR returns at Richmond, and hopefully it can resolve some of the big issues that this next-gen car has when it comes to multiple flat tires. So I'm glad to see NASCAR is looking at this, and I'm glad to see that they are likely going to fix this problem going forward into the future. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Josh Berry. As it was officially confirmed from AM Racing earlier this evening that Josh Berry will be driving the 15 car for AM Racing this weekend at Indianapolis. This means Josh Berry will be doing double duty like he did last weekend at Pocono. He drove the 15 car last week for the organization. Unfortunately, had multiple flat tires and finished around 27th position, but still finished on the lead lap. Look, I think Josh is a very solid driver, and he's trying to basically gauge where this organization is at currently at the moment, because AM Racing, when they had Hailie Deegan behind the wheel, there was not a lot of good things going on. So what hopefully we can see from here is maybe Josh Berry can really help the organization grow going forward. I don't know if it's going to happen, but I am glad to see that Josh Berry's back with AM Racing. Hopefully things can go better, and he can do a really good job this weekend at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Toby Sowery. As it was announced yesterday that Toby Sowery will be driving a 51 for Dale Coyne Racing for 2 more races in 2024. He'll drive this weekend in the streets of Toronto, and then he'll do it at Portland in August. Toby Sowery made his IndyCar debut with Dale Coyne Racing at the age of 28 years old, and honestly was extremely impressive. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he finished in 13th position, and many in the IndyCar paddock felt like that he deserved a chance and opportunity to go full-time in IndyCar in the future. Maybe if Dale Coyne wanted to hire him full-time, he could go ahead and do that. I think that would be a really good decision if they decide to do that, because I think Toby Sowery is a very talented race car driver. I think he's done a great job and done some great things, and I do think he deserves a chance and opportunity. But I'm very happy to see that Toby Sowery will be driving a 51 for Dale Coyne Racing for some of the remaining road course races in 2024. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Kevin Magnussen. As it was announced early this morning that Kevin Magnussen will in fact not be returning to Haas in 2025. Kevin Magnussen has been part of the Haas organization for many, many seasons, but there's been a lot of chatter and rumors and rumblings that with Ollie Behrman and Nico Hulkenberg joining Haas in 2025, I should say, there was really going to be no room for Kevin Magnussen to drive for the team. So now my big question is in regards to Kevin Magnussen, where does he end up in 2025? Many people believe that he could be either headed to the World Endurance Championship next year, or could be racing in IMSA and maybe going back to Chip Ganassi Racing. He does have some experience in IMSA in the World Endurance Championship, and also does have experience doing kind of like what his father did back in the day. Maybe he decides to go do some GT racing and drives a Corvette car like Jan Madison has done. That could certainly be a possibility. I think Kevin's done a lot of great things for Haas over the years, and it's sad to see that he will not be driving for this team going forward after this year, but it makes a lot of sense. They had to, with Ollie Behrman going in there, Nico Hulkenberg joined the team, it made way too much sense. I think it's a great move overall. Well, not a great move. It's sad to see he won't be returning to the team, but no one should be really shocked or surprised that Kevin Magnussen will not be returning to Haas in 2025. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about High Limit. As it was announced earlier this evening that High Limit Series will officially be going overseas for the first time with a 3-day event in Perth on December 28th through 30th. There's been rumors the High Limit Series was looking to expand globally going into the future, and we now know that I believe that Kyle Larson and Brad Sweet are both going to be competing in this event. This is an excellent move in my opinion. I'm really glad to see that the High Limit Series is continuing to expand. This will be year number 3 for them going into next year. They've already had a lot of success. Their TV numbers are huge, especially on the streaming services, and they've had a ton of success since being able to get in. So I'm very happy about this move for sure. I think we're going to see a lot of drivers, maybe even some NASCAR drivers could come over there during the off weeks and race. We know Kyle Larson is rumored at one point potentially be going and run a supercars race, same with Kyle Busch as well, and maybe SVG could be doing that as well in the future. But I am very happy to see this, that the High Limit Series is officially going to be joining. I'm really glad to see they're going to be going international. I think it's amazing. I think it's awesome. And again, really cool and awesome. It's just great to see in general that sprint car racing continues to grow. And I'm just very happy to see that the High Limit Series will be going overseas in 2024 near the end of this year. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about executive changes. As it was reported by Adam Stern yesterday, that NASCAR is initiating a major restructuring to its business, which will result in a more major role for Steve Phelps, meaning that Steve Phelps is going to get involved in the sport going forward. There were some local changes and some of the smaller changes, but the biggest change that came from some of these major executive changes is that Ben Kennedy has a new title, and that is EVP, meaning Executive Vice President of NASCAR. This is absolutely huge. Ben Kennedy is extremely young for someone who's going to be basically one of the higher-ups in the sport at the age of 32 years old, and he will report to Steve O'Donnell. I think Ben Kennedy has done a lot of great things for the sport. A lot of those major schedule changes that we have seen in the last couple of years, that is in part due to Ben Kennedy's work. And I think Ben has been an excellent asset to the sport over the course of the last few years. And I think he's certainly going to continue doing that going into the future. He's an excellent asset. And I just certainly think when you look at what Ben Kennedy's been able to do, and I think in the future, once we see the changes coming, I do think that he'll be running the sport overall. And Ben has a lot of really bright ideas, and he's also a former driver. So he kind of knows what the drivers want, and I certainly think he really would like to see the sport get in a much better place. And I think in his direction, I do think the sport is going to get in a much better place. So I'm really excited about this and very glad to see that Ben Kennedy is moved into more an executive role. I think this is a very excellent and great change overall, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Michael McDowell. Now, Michael McDowell very recently had a one-on-one with Bob Pockers, and he talked about what other changes can be coming at Spire Motorsports, and Bob kind of noted this, but Travis Peterson is expected to be the crew chief for Michael McDowell at Spire Motorsports in 2025. Both have achieved a lot of success over the last year or so since he joined up in 2023. That being Travis Peterson, they got the win at Indianapolis Motor Speedway, of course on the Indianapolis road course, and of course they've been pretty solid at times. Last year they would have been able to, I believe, make it on points as they were top 16 to 17 driver a majority of the season. They obviously haven't had the same pace or speed, but that's because Michael McDowell is leaving the team at the end of the year to go there. And I do believe that Michael McDowell is going to be able to really bring a lot to the table at Spire Motorsports next year. And having Travis Peterson being able to be there to help and guide him, I think is just going to be really good overall too. So I'm very excited about this overall. It's just such a great move for sure to see that Travis Peterson most likely is going to over. I think he's going to do some excellent things over there at Spire Motorsports next year. And I think there's some big changes coming over at Spire that are probably going to be announced in the next couple weeks that I think a lot of fans are going to be really excited about. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Mazda MX-5 Cup Series. As it was announced yesterday that the Mazda MX-5 Cup Series will officially be racing at Martinsville on October 26th. This will be in conjunction, I believe, to the Wheel and Modified Tour race or the modified race that is going to be happening on the same day as well. There have been rumors and chatters after a very successful Moon Car 24 Hours, which is a big part and reason why this is going to end up taking place. It has been my dream to see Mazda MX-5 cars on just running on a complete oval and racing at a track like this. I think that we're going to see something for the ages. I think the racing is going to be phenomenal. And if I'm a broadcast network, especially this probably will be stream free on YouTube, but if I was like a broadcast network like NBC, I would absolutely be broadcasting this, and I think the racing will be phenomenal. It's just going to be great to see. Again, I believe it's going to be a 100-lap dash, if I remember correctly. That's how long I think Bob reported that's how long it's going to be. But this is extremely huge, right? I think it's amazing to see that the Mazda MX-5 Cup Series is going to get an opportunity to put on a phenomenal and good product. I do think the racing will be good for sure at this track. Martinsville, outside of maybe the next-gen cars, Martinsville has generally put on an amazing and fantastic product. So I'm very excited about this coming in, and it's really amazing and great to see that the Mazda MX-5 Cup Series will officially race in Martinsville. I hope the racing can be good, and I think it will end up being good in 2024 at the end of this year. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Carson Kvapil. Now, Carson Kvapil did an interview recently for Dustin Albino, who works at jski.com and also, of course, works at another network called NASCAR. And basically, he had an interview with Carson Kvapil. And something he noted at the end of that article is that Carson Kvapil is hoping to do more races, not just at the end of this year in 2024, but is also hoping to make more starts in 2025 with Junior Motorsports as well. Carson Kvapil has been extremely impressive in 2024. He's been very, very solid. Has only had, I think, 1 or 2 finishes outside the top 10 this year. And I don't think he's had a single finish outside of the top 15 this entire year. And he continues to get better as a driver every time he gets behind the wheel. While his qualifying work still needs to be there, and he does have to work on certain instances in the qualifying side of things, I think his racing craft has been very, very good. And I certainly think that Carson Kvapil is going to do a pretty good job if he gets a chance and opportunity to be full-time. There is a chance he could be full-time with Junior Motorsports next year, but obviously we've got rumors and rumblings that Connor Zilic is going to go full-time, replace Sam Mayer, who's most likely going to end up getting one of those seats next year at Front Row Motorsports. Overall, I'm very excited about this for sure. The future for Carson, because I do think he's an extremely talented driver, and I certainly do believe that you are going to see Carson Kvapil potentially be full-time in the future, which I think is going to be really good for everybody, especially going into the future when you look at how talented of a driver Carson Kvapil really is. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Aric Almirola. Is Aric Almirola officially confirmed on Twitter earlier this evening that he will officially drive the 20 for Joe Gibbs Racing this weekend at Indianapolis Motor Speedway? For those who have been following and tracking what's been going on, Aric Almirola had been indefinitely suspended by Joe Gibbs back in May. There was an altercation that broke out in the competition meeting between Aric Almirola and Bubba Wallace, and we all were kind of wondering if Aric Almirola was going to be back behind the wheel of a Joe Gibbs racing car at all, because he was supposed to run at Charlotte and was also supposed to run in New Hampshire, I believe in the 19 or the 20 car. Now, Aric Almirola is back, and it's unknown at this point if he will be back at Joe Gibbs Racing in 2025 at this time, but many do believe there's a really good chance that it does, in fact, end up happening, where we do see Aric Almirola back in the 20 car driving for Joe Gibbs Racing full time. Obviously, there was some tension to happen behind the scenes, and obviously an altercation happening isn't great. And many people believe that the reason that Aric Almirola was suspended was because he was the instigator, and it wasn't Bubba Wallace. A lot of people like to instantly blame Bubba Wallace for certain situations, but when you look at the situation outright, many believe that are in the NASCAR world, in the garage, they do believe that Aric Almirola was the instigator in that situation. I ain't shocked or surprised to see this, and he's back. I think Aric will be a threat for the win. The Joe Gibbs Racing 20 car has been super competitive, and they've got their normal crew getting back. So I'm very excited about this, and not very excited for sure. I don't really care about Aric Almirola being back, but honestly, I hope that he can do a decent job. Obviously, there's a lot of controversy around Aric Almirola. Hopefully, he can do a good enough job. We'll see what he can do. I think he will for sure be a threat and contender to go to victory lane this weekend in the Xfinity Series at Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about international racing. Now, Bob Pockrass, and there was a media conference that took place over the week, and there was a lot of talk about the potential of NASCAR going international. Chad Siegler, who does run the operations on some of the scheduling, did reveal that the 2025 schedule is still not released. However, he does say that the 2025 schedule should not be too far down the road from being released. And he basically talked about the possibility of doing international race. He says it's not a matter of if, but when. Obviously, there's been a lot of chatters and rumors that they are looking to go international for 2025. There's been talk. They've been speaking to Mexico to race at the Autodromo Hernando Rodriguez track, and they've also been speaking to Canada about racing in Montreal. And they came super close to racing in Montreal in 2024, but unfortunately that fell through, and that's a major reason why Iowa Speedway ended up being on the NASCAR Cup Series schedule, though we are expecting that Iowa Speedway is likely going to be coming back in 2025. Though it's not been officially confirmed, it's expected to be announced here very, very soon. I want to see NASCAR go international. We've been seeing a lot of major sports and major vicinities. We've been seeing them kind of expand globally over the course of the last few years, and I certainly think NASCAR would be making a bad decision if they did not decide to expand globally. I understand money becomes a factor, and it does cost money to do this, but at the same time, you do in the future have to kind of expand in that certain way. I do expect that we are going to be racing internationally in 2025. Many do believe that they're getting close to getting a deal done with Mexico. There was talk about going to Montreal, but I certainly do believe that we are going to be going international, and we are going to be racing at Mexico City in 2025. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Rockingham Speedway. Now, if you've been paying attention over the course of the last few months, there's been a lot of talk and conversation surrounding the future of Rockingham Speedway. Now, the owner and the guy who runs Rockingham Speedway, that being Dan Levihans, he basically said in the future of Rockingham Speedway, of racing coming back there, he said soon. That was what Dan Levihans answered to the question of when high-level racing will return to Rockingham. I go back to that stream that Carson Osvar had on Twitch, and Carson had kind of teased the possibility of something like this ended up taking place. And I don't know if this means that the Cup Series will come back there, but I would love to see Rockingham Speedway come back on the NASCAR schedule altogether. The last time Rockingham was in NASCAR was all the way back in 2013. That's when Kyle Larson got his first ever Truck Series win in that number 30 truck for Turner Scott or H. Scott Racing at the time. And the last time the Cup Series and the Xfinity Series ran here was back in 2004. Jay McMurray won the last Xfinity Series race. He basically won 4 or 5 straight at this track. And then the last Cup win that happened was when Matt Kenseth picked up the last Cup Series win at the track. I really want to see Rockingham back on the NASCAR schedule. I really, really do. I've been pushing for it. I really wish it was going to be the All-Star race this year because I think the racing would be pretty good at Rockingham. And it doesn't matter what type of car you bring it to track, but track chews through tires like it's nobody's business. So I do think we could see this happen. I do believe that NASCAR is going to run at Rockingham in the future. The question is, does it get back on the schedule this year? I certainly think there's a really great chance and a very strong possibility that it will end up happening in 2025. We'll see what ends up happening. I don't think it's going to be on the Cup schedule more than likely, but I do think it will for sure be on the Xfinity Series and probably the Truck Series schedule as well. We're still waiting for the schedule to get released. Hopefully it gets released soon, and I really want to see that schedule get released. It'd be amazing to see it back on the schedule, believe me. I just don't think, unfortunately, it is going to end up happening where it officially ends up on the NASCAR Cup Series schedule. We'll have to wait and see what happens if I'm proven wrong, and we'll see if we do end up having a Cup Series race at Rockingham in the near future. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Trackhouse in 2311 racing. Now we're going to talk a little more about silly season here in the later portion of this episode, but Bob Pockers was asked questions about who are most likely going to pick up the charters from Haas Racing. And what Bob had reported is that Trackhouse in 2311 racing are expected to acquire the remaining 2 Haas Racing charters that are available. We already know that Spire Motorsports is expanding to a 3-car operation in 2025. There's rumors and rumblings that Sam Mayer is going to get that 3rd seat. We know Todd Gillen and Noah Gragson are confirmed to drive for 2 of those 3 seats, but the big question is who's going to get that 3rd seat in 2025. Many are believing Sam Mayer is going to get that, which if that's the case, many do think that Connor Zillage will take over the number 1 junior motorsports car next season. But going back to the 2 cars, the third 2311 racing car, let's begin with that first. Who are the 2 lead candidates for that? Well, we do believe that it's Riley Herbst and Corey Heim who are the 2 lead candidates to take over that seat. But many believe it's going to be Riley Herbst, and a big reason for that is because Riley Herbst does bring funding and sponsorship to the table from Monster, and Monster is heavily been working with 2311 Racing since the 2022 season, and they still work with Tyler Reddick. Many people do believe that that is a big move that is going to happen. Riley Herbst gets that seat. Many would rather have Corey Heim drive that car next year, but because of the funding Riley Herbst brings, that is most likely going to happen. We do know they're expected to have a 4th part-time 2311 racing car next year as well. Many do believe that we may see Mark Truex Jr. behind the wheel of that seat, and Corey Heim also, maybe Carlos Kurt Busch, if they ever wanted to come out of retirement, they could do that as well. As for Trackhouse Racing, it's between Zane Smith and Shane Van Gisbergen, and many do believe that SVG is going to get the 3rd Trackhouse seat. We do know Zane Smith's been getting better in Cup over the last month or so, but many do believe that even with the improved performance, they do think that it's going to end up being SVG getting the seat, which makes a lot of sense. Shane's been improving in Xfinity. His oval progress has been getting better, and I certainly do think that is what is going to end up happening. So I think SVG will be in the 3rd Trackhouse car next year. We're going to talk about Trackhouse here near the end of this episode, but I do think that is what will end up happening in regards to this team going into 2025. So we'll see what ends up happening for sure with the rest of this teams, but we do think that Trackhouse in 2311 Racing will pick up the 2 remaining SHR charters that are still currently available at this time. That's what's expected to happen, and I do believe that that is what is going to end up happening in 2025. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Brickyard 400. As Doug Bowles was on SiriusXM NASCAR Radio, I believe, early this morning, and he basically confirmed that while it's not been officially announced from Indianapolis Motor Speedway himself, they are going to return to the Brickyard 400 in the Indianapolis Oval in 2025. However, he does state that there is potential that a swap could happen where we could do a road course maybe in 2026 and potentially then come back to the Indy Oval in 2027. First of all, I want to say this. I am very happy to see that the Brickyard 400 is going to be back on the Indy Oval this year. I actually did enjoy the Indy road course race last year. I thought it was one of the better road course races we had all year. Yes, an action car has not raced very, very well on the types of road courses, but I do think the Indianapolis road course did put on a decent and good product. But at the same token, same time, I think returning to the Indianapolis Oval made way too much sense. There's been a lot of hype around it, especially in NASCAR, and a lot of people are truly very excited about the Brickyard 400 making its official comeback in 2024. But we also have not seen a race at this track, right? We haven't seen an action race, I should say, at this. But many people are expecting, and they're kind of curbing their expectations, which is something I think a lot of you, and I recommend to a lot of people as well, kind of curb your expectations for how the race is going to go. I don't think it's going to be a barn burner by any stretch of imagination. I think it's going to be decent. I think it's just going to be a normal Brickyard 400. As for coming back in 2025, I'm also very happy about that. I'm glad to see that they are returning to the Brickyard 400 next year. I know they haven't had an action race here yet, but I do think the racing will be pretty solid and pretty good. As for returning to the Indy Road Course in the future, I don't really like that going into 26. I really think we should just stay on the Indy Oval. If you want to move the Xfinity Series to the Indy Road Course, I think that'd be a great move. They're running the restrictor plate package this weekend, which I think is going to make for, unfortunately, a very lackluster product, sadly, when we do go this weekend. I think it's going to probably be the least impactful race of the weekend. I don't think it's going to be very exciting and very, very fun. But I am very excited, like I said, that the Brickyard 400 is coming back next year. I do truly believe that the racing will be very, very good. I think it will be very entertaining, and I think it will be solid and pretty excellent. So I'm really happy about this overall, but I'm glad to see the Brickyard 400 is coming back. But I also am skeptical. We'll see how the racing ends up going. Hoping it'll be good. I know drivers are kind of not big fans of it, and are really hoping we have more practice and wishing we have more practice, which I entirely agree. But many drivers are also excited for the return of the Brickyard 400 in 2024 and also in 2025 as well. And now we're going to ahead jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about street races. Now, it was reported by Adam Stern on late Tuesday evening that he was reported that at Chicago earlier this month, NASCAR hosted officials from other cities in the U.S. interested in hosting a street circuit race in the future. Over the last few years, NASCAR has hosted street racing at the Chicago Street Course. Unfortunately, both of those years have not been very successful. In certain instances, the Xfinity Series race this year, unlike last year, was extremely successful. Saw a fantastic battle between Shane Van Gisbergen and Kyle Larson. But we've been able to succeed street racing, and I think it's been able to put on at least a decent product in Xfinity. And I think Cup, when there hasn't been rain officially going downpouring among other things, I think the racing has generally been pretty solid and pretty spectacular as well. Now, speaking about the future of other street courses and other street tracks we could go to, what tracks could NASCAR go to, or what cities could they go to? I've been starting to look out west. Maybe Denver. Denver is a pretty untapped market. I know NASCAR used to race at the Pikes Peak International Raceway from the 90s up until 2005, but I certainly think Pikes Peak International Raceway would be a very solid and good option to go with. Not Pikes Peak, but Denver would be a great option. It's an untapped market. I think it'd be a great area to go with there. I think going up to the west, looking at Portland and Seattle, would be two very solid options as well. Maybe Houston, perhaps. Houston's kind of an untapped market down there. That could be a really good option going into the future. But one market that I think would probably make the most sense of any market is Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh has been more interested, and they would love to host a NASCAR race on the streets of Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh is 5 hours from Pocono Raceway, and it's a little bit farther away from the Philadelphia market as well. I think it makes a lot of sense because you could have a race at Pocono Raceway, but also because we've seen the crowds especially be very, very high for Pocono in recent years. And I think we would probably see some solid racing as well. And going under that tunnel in Pittsburgh would be really great. And it's kind of in a market that's not completely oversaturated too, which would make a ton and a lot of sense. And I think going to Pittsburgh would be very, very fun. And obviously when you look, and maybe also going to LA. LA would be another option to go with, especially since NASCAR is not racing in Los Angeles. From what I understand, going into 2025, I certainly do think that they would love to host a race in that area. So there's definitely a lot of options to go with, right? They've got a lot of areas that they could definitely look at, and I certainly think the NASCAR should be looking at all their options going into 2025 or 2026 in particular, because we still don't even know at this point if the Chicago Street Course is going to be coming back in 2025. Many are expecting that they are going to come back, but it's not been officially announced. So we'll see what ends up happening, and we'll see what the future looks like for street racing in particular, but we do expect that it's going to come back to Chicago, but we also could see some expansion to other certain cities going into the not-so-distant future. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Trackhouse Racing. As it was shockingly announced yesterday that Trackhouse Racing has a new investment group coming in known as Avenue Sports Fund. This Avenue Sports Fund group is run by Mark Lazary, who is a former owner of the Milwaukee Bucks. Mark Lazary is worth $1 billion in the company, and he will basically be able to bring a lot of money into the organization. What was also stated from the same Bloomberg article is that they'll be investing in NASCAR, MotoGP, and other forms of motorsport. We know that Justin Marks has been interested in expanding globally. He obviously announced earlier this year he'd be running MotoGP, and he's been very successful with that. They just picked up their first podium with the winning, I think, at the German Sprint race, if I'm not mistaken. And obviously look at their NASCAR program. They have won multiple Cup Series races. With Roush has won 4 races. Dale Suarez scored 2 victories, and SVG Shane Van Gisbergen has gotten a victory as well. So Trackhouse so far in their 4-year history has had 7 victories. For an organization that's not been around that long, that's not bad. But another big reason why this is a really good move is you look at Trackhouse Racing this year. They have definitely taken a step back in performance. And the money that Mark Lazary is going to be able to bring in, that he has, it is going to be able to bring a lot more capital into the organization and team, which will be able to boost their fan engagement, also their performance as well. Like I mentioned a second ago, Trackhouse Racing has definitely taken a pretty major step backwards compared to even last year. 2022, they were extremely successful. Then 2023, they took a little bit of step backwards. So Chastain still got 2 wins and I think made the round of 12 and nearly made the round of 8 that year. And this year, there's a chance that one of their drivers, that being Roush Chastain, may not make the playoffs. And Daniel Suarez has definitely taken a step back in certain instances in performance, though he has been able to win a race this year earlier in the year at Atlanta Motor Speedway. Bringing this money in is really going to help the performance. But there's another big reason why this is a great move for Trackhouse. They're looking to get a third charter, right? I already mentioned this earlier in the episode. But there's already talk that they are going to be one of the teams that's going to be purchasing one of the Stewart Haas Racing charters. We know Shane Van Gisbergen is the most likely to get that third Trackhouse seat going into 2025. It's unknown what Zane Smith is going to be doing next year. But with them being able to bring the money in, they'll be able to get SVG up quickly, and they won't have to worry as much about funding out of pocket because Justin Marks has been doing this at his own bread and butter. He's been bringing that money in, and obviously they've got a lot of young drivers who are part of their program as well. Now, what does this mean for the future of Trackhouse Racing? It really doesn't mean much except the fact that the money that they are going to be getting from Mark Lazary is going to be able to be used to invest and grow their program, which they've been doing a lot of things out of the box. And you look at a lot of sports, especially in NASCAR as well. This new thing that's been happening where you have these investment groups coming in because they're interested in basically the charter system is really nothing uncommon and new at this point, right? You've got the Fenway Group who's been working with Roush. Also, Bragg's also investing in that partnership as well. And you look at Joe Gibbs Racing recently. The Harris Blitzer Group that works with the Washington Commanders. Joe Gibbs has joined that ownership group. And we've seen the Harris Blitzers take part ownership of Joe Gibbs Racing. And this is something that I think is going to become a lot more common as time progresses and goes on. I do think you are going to see more of these organizations in NASCAR take this. I wouldn't be shocked if Hendrick Motorsports in the future does this. And I certainly think teams like 2311 are going to get some of those investment groups in the future as well. We still don't have a agreement done with the charter deal, and it sounds like earlier this week, they did speak about that. It seems like things aren't going 100% correctly with that charter deal at the moment. But having an investment group come in like this, I think to help out a team like Trackhouse is really, really huge. This is big also because, like I said, I do think you are going to get a third charter from Trackhouse announced here in the next couple of weeks. It's really interesting stuff for sure. Very interesting. It'll be a thing to watch for as time progresses and goes on. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the first of 2 major stories in today's episode as we're talking about Cole Custer. As there was reported by Bob Pockers and many other major reporters in the NASCAR industry that Cole Custer is expected to announce his 2025 plans later this week in Indianapolis at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. He will announce his 2025 plans. Now, we don't exactly know what they are going to be for 2025, but what Bob Pockris and many others have indicated, it sounds more than likely that Cole Custer will officially be announced to drive for the Haas Factory Cup Series team in 2025. This makes a lot of sense. Cole Custer, of course, is the son of Joe Custer, who is expected to run the operation, and Cole Custer has been doing a really good job in Xfinity over the course of the last couple of years. In 2023, he scored 3 victories and went on to win the NASCAR Xfinity Series title. And so far this year, in 2024, Cole Custer has looked pretty good. He's had some strong performances. He just won the most recent race at Pocono, and I think he's had 13 or 14 top 10s in like the 18 or 19 races we've ran in the NASCAR Xfinity Series this year. So I think he's earned a second chance and opportunity. And I think having a program all around him makes a lot of sense. Now, if he truly is going in there, we don't know exactly at this time whether the team is going to get fully funded, if they're going to get help from Ford. Many people do expect that they are not going to get extremely fully funded by Ford. But that being said, I think Cole Custer has become a much better driver. And I also do think that Jonathan Toney, who's been the crew chief for him in Xfinity, will most likely be the crew chief for Cole Custer in the Cup Series next year. Now, the other big question we ask is, what is the number going to be? Because we don't know what it's going to be at this point, right? Well, I think it's either going to be the 41 or the 00. And I'm actually leaning toward being the 00. I think the 41 would make a lot of sense because that 41 was the number they introduced when Kurt Busch came into the Cups, or not Cup, but came over to SHR. So that could be a number they use that Ryan Preece uses as well. But I think the most likely number is going to be 00. That was the original number that Haas used when they came into the Cup Series, and I think it would make a ton of sense to use the 00, as it's been a legendary number, and it's won a championship with Cole as well. So I think that's the number that they are going to be using for next year. Again, some are going to question this move, but I do think that Cole Custer is earned the right and opportunity to get a second chance. And he's still a relatively young driver. Cole, I think, is only 25 and turns 26 near the end of this year, but he is still a very relatively younger driver. And I think he's earned the right to move back up. Now, what are my expectations for Cole Custer going into 2025 in the Cup Series? Well, realistically, I'm just going to say this. I think Cole Custer is going to struggle a little bit this year. I think he is going to be in the lower half of the standings. I think Cole will have some decent performances for sure, but I think because of the fact that they're not going to be getting direct support from Ford, because they will remain with Ford next year, I do think they're going to struggle next year, sadly. I think the performances aren't going to be there for them, and I think he runs around 30th, 31st in the standings. That being said, I think Cole will run better than he did in Cup. I think the field is just going to be so competitive next year. Look at a lot of the major silly season moves that have already happened so far this year. I think Cole Custer will do a pretty solid job, and I think the performance will be okay, but let's be real and frank, it is a car that will not have Ford affiliation. The other big question you ask now is, with also Riley Herbst most likely moving up to the Cup Series of 23-11 next year, you ask yourself, who's going to be in the Xfinity Series program? Well, a lot of people have linked Ryan Preece and Harrison Burton as the two lead candidates currently at the moment, but also Hailie Deegan's name has been mentioned as well as a possibility. I look at Ryan Preece. Ryan's done a decent job at SHR, but not a very great job, and it's clear as day that he's been the weak link, at least at SHR this year. Chase Briscoe, Noah Gragson, and Josh Berry have all had better performances than Ryan Preece this year. But I think racing full-time in the Xfinity Series would make a ton and also make a lot of sense. Harrison Burton, we know, will not be back with the Wood Brothers next year. There is a chance he could go to Rick Ware part-time, or maybe still could be a candidate for one of those front row rides. But many are expecting to be back in Xfinity, and I think he either ends up in the 15 car or ends up in the Haas factory team next year. It would make a ton of sense, and I think it'd be a great move to put him behind the wheel of that seat next year. I think he'd do a lot better in Xfinity than he'd do in Cup. But looking at the other driver, Hailie Deegan, she brings sponsorship and funding, and with the Monster money potentially sticking around, they're looking for outside sponsors to come into play. I certainly think with Hailie Deegan and her sponsorship that she has, I think she could absolutely be a candidate for the seat as well. So I think it's between her, her, Debbie, and Hailie Deegan, Ryan Preece, and Harrison Burton for the ride. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens. We are expecting the announcement to happen in the coming hours. And again, it's very likely that it will be Cole Custer will be moving up to the Cup Series next year. I think Cole is going to do a solid job. There's no denying that. I think he will do a pretty good job next year in Cup. But again, they won't be getting direct support from Ford, which I think unfortunately will hurt him in a big way. So we'll see what the announcement is, but it's expected that Cole will be joining the Haas factory team in 2025. Now we're going ahead, jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about Hailie Deegan once again. And now we're talking about her future. It's no secret that Hailie Deegan's future in NASCAR currently is very uncertain. Remember, a few weeks ago, it was announced that Hailie Deegan would not be returning to AM Racing for the remainder of the year. It all started back at Chicago a few weeks ago. Hailie Deegan was supposed to be behind the wheel of the number 15 car for the whole entire year, but that 15 car had completely struggled, and they decided to put Joe Logano behind the wheel of the 15 car for the week at Chicago. That car ended up finishing 8th, but they were having some issues on the radio, among other things, and there was some critical stuff that was starting to come out about AM Racing behind the scenes. Then it was announced later that week that Hailie Deegan would not be returning to AM Racing for the remainder of the season, and Josh Berry has been behind the wheel of the number 15 car for the last few races, and they're expected to have drivers rotating. We could see Matt DiBenedetto, we could see Brett Moffitt come back over there and run a few races. That could certainly be a possibility for the remainder of the year. But there was something very interesting that came out from the Happy Harvick podcast, the Happy Hour podcast that Kevin Harvick runs. They were all kind of talking about Hailie Deegan and wondering what was the big thing that caused Hailie Deegan to really drop off in performance. Well, Kevin Harvick noticed something happened in 2019. Back in the 2019 season, she was in the Toyota development system, and she was having a lot of success with Toyota. She, of course, drove for McLaren, and she had multiple victories in the 2 years she ran there. She won twice, I think, in 2018 and once in 2019. But then in late 2019, she decided to leave the Ford program. And Kevin Harvick actually called out the Ford development program in a pretty big way by saying it is the worst development program that they have. He says that Toyota, they have the best development program. And then he says Chevy is somewhere in the middle. Back in 2019 going into 2020, there was a lot of drivers in the Toyota pipeline, and it was going to be tougher for her to make the move up the Cup. Obviously, you look at some of the teams, right? The drivers. You had Harrison Burton at the time, who was pretty good in Xfinity. You, of course, had Noah Gragson, who I think was still... Noah Gragson was at Chevy, but previously, he had been at Toyota at one point. You, of course, had other drivers like Austin Hill Racing. You had other drivers, other guys coming up like Chandler Smith. And, of course, Ty Gibbs started making his through the ranks. I think he had made a couple IRCA East starts back in 2019. I think was winning races as well. And he had Derek Kraus at the time and a few other big names. But when you look at Ford, when she went over to Ford, you still had Team Penske at the time, and there were rumors and rumblings at the time going around that potentially RFK Racing was maybe looking to bring back their Xfinity Series program. But in the Truck Series, you didn't have Front Row Motorsports back in 2020. You did have some other teams. I think Front Row actually came in 2020, so I'm not entirely sure it's accurate. But you have Front Row, and you, of course, had DGR, right? And DGR, while they're great now with Tricon, they weren't exactly amazing and fantastic. And then, of course, you do look at Front Row. They became solid with Todd Gillen, and they had some pretty performances during that time. And then you go to 2021, where she moves up to the Truck Series after a little bit of a bad year, in ARCA, an okay year, but they moved her up and rushed her up way too quickly, and Hailie Deegan basically struggled in the Truck Series as a rookie. Now, she then, in 2022, stayed with the team, got worse instead of getting better. Then she goes to Thor Sport Racing, and she improves a little bit. She got a couple top fives, but was not really great with Thor Sport. And then she moved up to AM Racing this year. I think moving up to AM was a pretty big mistake. But a lot of people stated her leaving Toyota to go to Ford was probably one of the biggest mistakes of her career. And I do agree entirely 100%. She went to a young team with inexperienced people, and it really just never was going to work. I think we all can admit that now, that it really wasn't going to work with Hailie Deegan being over there. So now the big question surrounds about her future. Can Hailie Deegan come back to NASCAR? Absolutely, without question. We know that she's been trying to maybe make some Indy NXT starts late in the year, especially with drivers that have a lot of oval experience. They're looking to bring her in. And we also know that she's going to be running a Trans Am race later this weekend, and rumors that she was going to be driving in the IROC race as well. But Hailie Deegan obviously can come back to NASCAR. Now, can she come back full-time to Xfinity? Yes, absolutely, without question. I think there is a chance that she could be racing in Xfinity next year. Just talk about it with the Cole Custer news, right? There is a chance that she could be driving for the Haas factory team next year. She brings sponsorship funding with her, and I know sometimes only sponsorship could take you for so long, but I do think that the Haas factory team could be a really good option. Maybe she leaves Ford altogether and runs a part-time schedule with Joe Gibbs Racing. That could certainly be a possibility. She could have had a JGR, ARCA, or Xfinity Series ride. That could have been definitely an option for her for sure. And then maybe staying in trucks and running a few races there. That could be another possibility as well. I think that Hailie Deegan can come back and be successful if she had a group around her. She doesn't have going into this year, she didn't have a teammate. There were rumors and rumblings that Brett Moffitt and Matt Benedetto were looking to be teammates with her for this season. Had AM Racing had a second car, I think that she would have been a little bit better. And I don't think we're having these conversations about her unfortunately being kind of a bust, because a lot of people label her as a bust. But I don't want to say that she's a bust just yet. She's still young enough. She's only 23. She just turned 23 today. And I do think that Hailie Deegan has a lot of capabilities in other forms. We've seen what she can do in S-Tracks, and we've seen what she can do in, of course, those IMSA GT Michelin Pilot Challenge races that she competed in. So I think Hailie Deegan definitely does have talent. But the problem is that she really hasn't been able to harness that talent that she has, at least in NASCAR. And it's a big shame and disappointing, because I really wanted to see Hailie Deegan succeed in NASCAR, and it just wasn't working out, sadly, for her. I do think she comes back. I think she'll drive for Haas most likely next year full time, because I think Haas is looking for funding, and I certainly think they're going to try to find a way to get the funding. I know her future's in question. I do agree with a lot of what Kevin Harvick said about her. I do think her future definitely is in pretty big jeopardy, however. So, that is going to be today's NASCAR news and motorsports news video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow my Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support my Patreon as well. Let's go below that and comment your thoughts below on today's episode. Where do you think Hailie Deegan drives next year? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And what are your thoughts about Cole Custer? Where do you think he ends up next year? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Later today on the channel, we're going to have the NASCAR Truck Series race picks for IRP, race review, I should say. And then on Saturday, we'll have the Xfinity Series race from Indianapolis. We'll, of course, have the reactions to Cup qualifying for the Brickyard 400. And we'll have a lot of great content dropping this weekend for the Brickyard 400. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode. And I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.